You are the commissioner of a sport where the fans, I feel like, attach themselves to individual players, in many cases, every bit as much as they do to the teams that they have traditionally supported. How does that impact the league when we see these kinds of players moving around as much as they did this summer?
To me, it's yet another issue where it's a question of finding the appropriate balance. I mean, one of the things we did back in the 2011 collective bargaining agreement, and that's continued, is to shorten contracts. I mean, I think sometimes when people talk about player empowerment, they forget that part of this was by design in terms of the partnership with the players, that if you're going to have shorter contracts, guys are going to become free agents more frequently. I mean, roughly 42% of our league were free agents this past summer. That to me isn't necessarily empowerment. It means we've made a decision that teams should be able to rebuild faster. To the extent teams make mistakes, they can get out of them faster, and that's where we find the league. I think ultimately it's positive. I think it's also better to more closely tie pay to performance. That's part of what comes with shorter contracts as well. But of course, the downside of it is that teams break apart faster. And you're right, though. I think the modern fan has changed. There's more of direct connection between players and fans. There's still team loyalty, and it's something we're always continuing to tinker with and calibrate with. And we sit down with the players next time, we'll look at it anew. But I think right now it's a pretty good system. And I think when's the last time we went into a season with the kind of competition we have this year?
No, with the competitive balance that you're talking about.
Right.
And to me, that's an extremely important point. I don't mean we were going to go there, but that's one of the places we wanted to go. We've had this conversation as well. I felt like what happened with Golden State really was a problem for the league, and it didn't happen this year. How do you view the level of competitive balance in the sport going into this season relative to the last year?
You know, I just say, as a longtime fan and a longtime employee of the league, I actually don't remember a time going into a season where there was the sense that there was this much competitive balance. I mean, I've also learned you got to play the games. And so, just as you said, there was a prohibitive favorite last year that didn't win the championship. So we'll see how it works, but it certainly looks great on paper going into the season.
How about analytics? A lot of fans would say that analytics have negatively impacted baseball, right? How do you find that balance as basketball moves into the analytics space?
We've welcomed it, as you know, in the NBA. And I think part of data is data. You can't turn the clock back on that in any industry, whether it's leading to increased three-point shooting, whether it's a different kind of assessment of certain players' skills on the floor. I think sometimes in terms of analytics, there's a tendency to sort of overstate offensive sort of excellence, and the numbers aren't used as well, I think, in defense, meaning that a player who's a great defensive player doesn't get appreciated in the same way as a great offensive player. But again, it's got to be a balance. I mean, it's one of the things that doesn't lend itself to analytics is chemistry. And there's no easy formula for that. And you know, as a former player and talking to players in this league, sometimes a player can come onto a team, looks great on paper. That's why it's always hard to predict going into a season. And they just don't meld well in the locker room. Not necessarily a bad guy or anything else, but it doesn't work from a chemistry standpoint. So it's what makes team sports so fascinating. A team sport, you know, as opposed to baseball, the analytics are a little bit more accurate because you have 9 independent actors on the field. In the case of basketball, it's sometimes hard to predict how guys will connect to each other.
But one of the outcomes of the addition of analytics has been more three-point shooting, which begs the question, and I just want to have a little fun, will we ever see a 4-point shot in the NBA?
I think highly unlikely. I think there's a rock and jock MTV aspect of that. You know? And I think
they're practicing it though. I see teams using it in practice.
You know, we've mentioned it even in passing as maybe something fun to try an all-star, and the reaction from the players has been incredibly negative. I think some fans might love it, so I should never say never, but I think it's unlikely.
How about moving it back, maybe extending the space on the floor?
Well, Jay, as you know, I mean, we've moved the three-point line, I think, roughly 5 times in my tenure at the NBA. So that is something we'll continue to look at. I mean, that's where analytics come into play. I mean, for every foot you move the three-point line back, you can the analytics will show you what percent roughly you will bring down shooting percentage. So I think that's something worth looking at. It's one of the great aspects of having this development league, our G League, that it's something we're talking right now about with our competition committee, potentially experimenting in the G League. Of course, you get pushback because since now over 50% of our NBA players have spent time in the G League, our GMs and coaches don't want guys in the G League playing with a different three-point line they do in the NBA. But I think we got to work those issues through.
Thank you for watching ESPN on YouTube. For more sports, highlights, and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.